The desk phone rang at 3:12 in the morning from room 108, and when I answered, a man I had never checked in asked me very politely whether his brother had arrived yet. I want to be careful with how I tell this, because the order of things is the only thing that makes it believable, and I need at least one person to believe it. Not because it changes anything, it's too late for it to change anything, but there's a weight to carrying a thing alone, and I've been carrying this one for a while now, and I've noticed that the longer I hold it, the more it starts to feel like the motel is still holding me. So I'm going to set it down here, in order, and you can do with it what you want. I took the night audit job at the Larkspur Motor Lodge in the spring after the plant closed. I was 34. I had 4 months of savings and one marketable skill, which was that I could stay awake through the dead hours and be careful with numbers without my mind wandering. That was what the plant had made of me over 11 years on the overnight quality line. A man who could watch the same thing for 8 hours and notice the one time it changed. I didn't know yet how useful that would turn out to be, or how much I'd come to wish I'd been worse at it. The listing said, overnight desk associate, light bookkeeping, quiet location. Quiet was the word that got me. After the plant went down, there had been a lot of noise in my life, the bad kind. The kind that comes from phone calls with the bank and long silences at the dinner table with my mother, who I'd moved back in with because neither of us could afford to be alone. Quiet sounded like medicine. I called the number and a woman named Delia hired me over the phone in under 10 minutes. She didn't ask for a resume. She asked 2 questions. She asked whether I lived alone, and when I said I lived with my mother, she paused, just slightly, and then she asked whether I was the kind of person who could follow instructions I didn't understand. I laughed and said sure. She didn't laugh. She said, good, that's most of the job. She told me the previous auditor had moved on suddenly. I didn't think anything of it. People move on suddenly from motels off the interstate. That's the whole business model of a place like that. Transients, people passing through and not looking back. I would learn later that Delia chose her words the way a person chooses stones to cross a river, each one placed exactly, none of them wasted, and that moved on was not a figure of speech. The Larkspur has 22 rooms in an L shape around a cracked parking lot, a drained pool behind a sagging chain-link fence, and an office about the size of a walk-in closet. It sits on an old state route that used to carry traffic before the highway went in 4 miles east. Now the route carries almost nothing. In the daytime, when I'd arrive for the handoff, you could stand in the middle of that road for a full minute and not see a car. That was the first thing I noticed, and the first thing I talked myself out of noticing, because a dead road explains an empty motel, and an explanation is a door you can close. There were no guests, not few guests, not slow season. In the 11 months I worked there, I checked in a total of 0 people, not one. The lot stayed empty except for my own car, a grey sedan with a taillight I kept meaning to fix. The pool stayed drained, a concrete basin with leaves in the deep end. The vending machine at the end of the corridor hummed and glowed for nobody, and yet every night when I logged into the property management system at 11, the occupancy report showed 19 of the 22 rooms as occupied in green with names, arrival dates, and nightly rates, as if the place were doing steady business in a town that had none. The first night I assumed it was a software error. That's the honest truth, and I hold on to it because it's the last completely innocent thought I remember having. I sat in that little office with the space heater ticking against my ankles and I thought, the system's out of sync with reality. Delia will straighten it out in the morning. I even wrote her a note. I have a habit of writing things down. It's the one thing the plant trained into me that never wore off. Write it down, initial it, date it, so that later, when someone asks what happened, there's a record and not just a story. So I wrote, system showing 19 rooms occupied, lot is empty, please advise. I initialed it. I dated it. I left it on the clipboard the day staff used. The next afternoon the note was gone, and taped under the monitor was a laminated card I hadn't seen before. The lamination was fresh. The edges were still sharp and the plastic hadn't yellowed like everything else in that office. It said, in a font somebody had clearly chosen because it looked official, please complete all guest services as listed, regardless of visible occupancy, thank you. MGMT, regardless of visible occupancy. I read that line a lot of times over the following months. It's a strange thing to laminate. You laminate things you intend to use for a long time. You laminate things you expect other people after you to need. The guest services were listed in a binder, and I want to be precise about them because the precision is the part that eventually got inside me and stayed. Every night I had a checklist: deliver fresh towels to the occupied rooms and leave them folded on the exterior handrail outside each door. Refill the ice machine and run it for 20 minutes starting at 2 a.m. Log any wake-up call requests that came in. Set the office thermostat to 68 and the corridor thermostat to 71 and check them at the top of every hour. Turn the vacancy sign off at midnight and back on at 5. Record the night's activity in the ledger, and at the very bottom underline twice, do not enter occupied rooms. On night 1, none of this scared me. It bored me. I decided the owners were absentee, that the place was a tax shelter or a laundering front, or just somebody's stubborn refusal to admit that a business had died, and that my job was to keep the lights on and not ask questions. I'd had worse jobs for worse reasons, so I folded towels, I ran the ice, I set the thermostats and checked them on the hour. My pay came as cash in an envelope left in the drop safe every Friday, always exact to the dollar, always crisp. The bills so new they stuck together, and I told myself I was lucky, and for a little while I believed it. The towels are what I'd undo first, if I could go back and undo one thing. On the 4th night, when I went out at 2 to run the ice, I noticed that the towels I'd left on the handrail outside room 108 the night before were gone. Not blown away. It wasn't a windy stretch, and anyway, the towels outside the other rooms were exactly where I'd left them, stiff and damp with dew, folded the way I fold. Only 108s were gone, and in their place, folded on the handrail, was a used towel. Slightly grey, slightly damp, but not with dew, damp in the middle the way a towel is damp after a body. And laid across it, dark against the pale terry cloth, was a single hair. I stood there in the cold with my breath rising through the security light, and I told myself a story, several stories actually, one on top of the other. An animal took the clean towels. The wind took some and left others. Delia comes at night sometimes, and I don't know it. The previous auditor left that used towel months ago, and I simply never looked closely before. That's 4 explanations for one towel. I know now that when you need 4 explanations for one small thing, the thing is not small. It's just quiet, and quiet things are the ones you have to watch. I picked up the used towel with 2 fingers, the way you pick up something you don't want to touch but can't leave, and I did not put it in the laundry. I put it in a plastic grocery bag, and I put the bag in the trunk of my car. I couldn't have told you why. Some part of me was already gathering evidence for a version of myself who hadn't arrived yet, the version who would need proof that he hadn't imagined all of this. That was also the first night I really looked at the cameras. There were 4 of them, ancient, feeding into a boxy recorder in the office that wrote over itself every 72 hours. 1 covered the office, 1 covered the ice machine and the vending area. 2 covered the 2 arms of the corridor. The image was grey and grainy, time-stamped in the corner in a jittering white font. I hadn't paid attention to the cameras before because there was never anything to watch. But after the towel, I wanted to see 108's door. I scrubbed back to the night before, to the stretch between when I'd left the clean towels and when I'd found the used one. The corridor sat there in grainy stillness. Nothing walked into frame. No door opened, or so I thought, until I ran it a second time at half speed and caught it. At 3:40 in the morning, the door to 108 opened. Not all the way, about an inch. It held there, 1 inch ajar, a black seam in the grey, for exactly the length of time it took the timestamp to jump. Because the timestamp jumped. It went from 3:40 to 3:52 with no frames in between, a clean 12-minute cut, and when the picture came back, the door was closed again, and my clean towels were gone from the rail, and the used one was there in their place, folded, and I had watched none of it happen because for 12 minutes there had been nothing to watch. The camera hadn't recorded darkness, it had recorded absence. There's a difference, and I can't fully explain it except to say that darkness is something, and those 12 minutes were nothing, a hole cut out of the night. I watched that clip maybe 6 times. Then I stopped, because I noticed that every time the door reached its 1-inch opening, I found myself leaning toward the monitor, and I didn't like how badly some part of me wanted it to open the rest of the way. I need to tell you about the ledger, because the ledger is the spine of the whole thing. It's a physical book, green cloth cover, cracked at the corners, the kind of thing you'd find in the back office of a hardware store in 1985. Every night I was supposed to record activity. At first I didn't know what activity meant in a building with no guests, so I wrote things like "no activity, lot empty, 2:14 a.m. and initialed and dated them out of habit. After about a week, the laminated notes started getting more specific, appearing under the monitor in the daytime while I slept, always in that same official font. One said, "Record guest departures in the ledger when the system clears a room." So I started watching the system for departures, and the system did clear rooms. Not often. Maybe once every few nights, a green occupied line would flip on its own with no keystroke from me to a grey line that read "checked out" with a timestamp, always between 3 and 4 in the morning, the deepest part of the shift, the part where your body wants to quit whether or not your mind agrees. When it happened, 3 things happened together, always in the same order. The corridor thermostat would click as if someone had adjusted it. The ice machine would drop a load of cubes even when it wasn't the scheduled cycle, a sudden rattle and thud in the quiet. And the pressure in my ears would change, the specific soft pop you feel when a door opens somewhere in a sealed building, except I never heard a door, and every door I could see was closed. The binder was clear about what to do. When the system clears a room, go to it in the morning light, after 5, when the vacancy sign is back on, strip it, remake it, record the departure, never at night. The first time it happened, it was room 114. I waited until 5:15, when the sky outside had gone that flat pre-dawn grey, and I took the master key off its hook, and I went to 114 with my heart going harder than I wanted to admit. The bed was slept in. I want to say that as plainly as I can. In a motel with no guests, in a room I had never entered, a room with no car ever parked in front of it, the bed was slept in. The covers were thrown back on one side, the way a person throws them when they get up. There was a body-shaped depression in the mattress, and when I put my hand flat on it, it was warm, warmer than the room. The specific living warmth the bed holds for a few minutes after someone has climbed out of it. On the nightstand stood a glass of water, half full, with a lip print on the rim, a faint oval smudge. The bathroom mirror was fogged, and as I stood there watching, the fog was retreating from the edges inward, the way it does after a shower, slowly clearing, as if someone had bathed minutes before I walked in. And on the desk lay a room keycard and a folded piece of motel stationery. On the stationery, in careful handwriting, were 4 words: "Thank you for the quiet." I stripped the bed. I remade it with clean linens from the cart. My hands did the work while the rest of me stood a little to the side and screamed, very calmly, without any sound. Then I went back to the office and opened the ledger and recorded the departure. Room 114, the date, my initials, because that was the job and because writing things down is what I do when I don't know what else to do with a fact I can't hold. That's when I turned the pages backward for the first time. I'd never done it before, why would I? But that morning, with my pulse doing something ugly in my throat, I flipped back through the ledger and I found handwriting that wasn't mine. A lot of it. Different hands, different pens going back years, decades maybe, the ink browning towards the front of the book. And every single entry was a departure. Just departures. Room numbers, names, dates, and a column headed "condition on departure," which people had filled in with short phrases. Peaceful. Slept. No disturbance. Waited by the window. Did not want to leave. Asked for more time, and once near the middle of the book, in a shaky hand that pressed so hard it had torn the paper, "Please stop making me do this." I closed the book. I finished my shift. I drove home as the sun came up over the dead road, and I told myself I was going to quit. I didn't quit. That's the part the whole story is really about, if I'm honest, and I've decided to be honest even where it makes me look bad. Especially there. My 4 months of savings were down to less than 1. The envelope came every Friday, exact and crisp, more money for less work than anyone had ever offered me. And there's a thing that happens when you're frightened and broke at the same time. The broke part always wins the argument every night because the broke part has a deadline and the frightened part only has a feeling. Just 1 more week, I told myself. I'll find another job and then I'll leave. I told myself that for a long time, and every Friday the envelope agreed with me, so I stayed. And because I stayed, I started paying attention, the way you pay attention to a coworker you've decided not to trust. I studied the motel. I decided that if I was going to be part of whatever this was, I would at least understand it, as if understanding were a kind of innocence. It isn't. The first thing I mapped was the rooms. 19 occupied, 3 vacant. The 3 vacant ones were always the same 3, 101, 102, and 122. They never flipped to green, not once, the whole time I was there. I filed that away without knowing what it meant. The second thing I did was worse. I started writing down the names. Not in the ledger, in my own notebook, the one I kept in my jacket. The names in the system were ordinary. Gregory Palmer, Susan Okafor, a D. Reyes, a T. Whitlock, and one that wasn't a name at all. In room 110, in the field where a name should go, the system simply read, Mother. Room 110 was occupied the entire 11 months and never once checked out. Everything else churned, not that one. On a slow Tuesday, I did the thing you're never supposed to do. I looked the names up. Gregory Palmer had a short obituary from 6 years back in a town 2 states away. Missing, presumed drowned, body never recovered, memorial held anyway, so the family could have closure. Susan Okafor turned up in a local news item, a woman who had walked away from her life, left a note on the kitchen table, and was never found. The case eventually closed for lack of anything to keep it open. D. Reyes, I couldn't confirm. T. Whitlock was a teenage boy who'd gone out on his bike in 1994 and simply not come home. Different states, different decades, different circumstances, but the same shape underneath all of it, and the shape was not the shape of ghosts. These weren't people who had died at the Larkspur. These were people who had gone missing from everywhere, from anywhere, people the world had lost track of, people caught in that specific grey zone of not confirmed dead and not really alive, the ones whose families keep a bedroom exactly the way it was. Keep a room ready. The phrase stopped me when it surfaced, because that was what I was doing. 19 rooms ready, fresh towels on the rail, ice at 2, thermostat at 71. I was keeping rooms ready for people the world was in the middle of forgetting. Around then, the phone call started. Or maybe they'd been happening all along and I'd been sleeping through them at the desk. The front desk phone had a line for each room, an old system with a panel of little plastic buttons. When a room called the office, its button lit up. And on a night in my 6th month, at 3:12 in the morning, the button for 108 lit up and the phone rang. I should not have answered. Every instinct I had left told me not to. I answered anyway, because 11 years on a line teaches you that when something changes, you look at it. I picked up and I said the greeting I'd never once had a reason to say, front desk. And there was a pause full of a sound like a large empty room. And then a man's voice, calm and courteous and tired, asked me whether his brother had arrived yet. He said he'd been expecting him for a while. He said he'd leave the light on. Then, before I could answer, the line went to a soft, even breathing, and under the breathing, so quiet I had to press the phone hard against my ear, a tuneless humming, steady and absent-minded, the kind of humming a person does with their hands busy and their mind somewhere else. I hung up. I checked the log the system kept of incoming calls, and there it was, a call from room 108, 3:12 a.m., duration 41 seconds. A room with no guest and, as far as any camera had ever shown, no working phone that anyone had lifted. Over the following weeks there were more. Wake-up requests from occupied rooms logged by the system for times like 4:44 and 5:55. A call from 117 that was nothing but breathing. A call from 103 where a woman's voice said a name I didn't recognize 3 times, each time more like a question, and then said clearly, "You changed the number," and hung up. That one I sat with for a long time, because "you changed the number" was a specific accusation, and I didn't yet understand it was aimed at me. I want to tell you about Delia, because I'd been treating her like a voice on a phone and a stack of laminated cards, and around my 7th month she stopped being that. I had never seen her at night. We overlapped only in the daytime, at the handoff, and even then barely, because she kept to the back office behind a door I wasn't given a key to. But one afternoon I came in early and caught her at the front desk, and I got my first real look at her. She was older than she'd sounded, careful and grey and very still, with the kind of stillness that isn't calm, the kind that's holding something. On the desk beside her hand was the green ledger, open, and she was reading it, and when she saw me, she closed it without hurry, the way you close a book you know by heart. I asked her as lightly as I could how long she'd worked at the Larkspur. She said, longer than I meant to. I asked whether she ever came in at night. She looked at me for a moment and said, I don't go out there anymore. And something in the way she said out there made the corridor with its 19 occupied rooms sound like a country she'd emigrated from. I asked, mostly joking, whether the place was haunted. She didn't smile. She said, it's not haunted. Haunted is when something stays that should have left. This is the other thing. I asked what the other thing was. She picked up the ledger and held it against her chest like something she was protecting or something she couldn't put down, and she said, it's where the leaving happens. Somebody has to keep the book. And then, quieter, not to me, I kept it too long. That's the mistake. You keep it long enough, you stop being the one who writes and start being the one who's written. I noticed her handwriting later, matching it against the ledger. Delia's hand ran through years of that book, page after page of departures in her careful script. And then, at a certain point, maybe a decade back, it simply stopped, and other hands took over, auditor after auditor, and hers never appeared again. But she was still there in the daytime, still keeping the book in her way from the back office. She wouldn't leave. She hadn't quit. She'd just stopped being able to go out there. I think she'd figured out the thing I was still refusing to figure out, and I think staying was her penance, the way it would become mine. The vacant rooms were the next thing I cracked, and I wish I hadn't. 101, 102, and 122. Always empty, never green. I'd assumed they were broken, out of service, water damage, whatever. But one night, going through a locked drawer in the desk, looking for extra ledger pages, I found a second, thinner book. And this one wasn't a departure ledger. It was a reservations ledger, and it had only a handful of entries, and each one was for one of the 3 vacant rooms, and each one had a name. And beside each name, instead of condition on departure, a different column, expected. The vacant rooms weren't broken. They were reserved, held, waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet but was going to. 2 of the 3 names I didn't know. The third name in room 101, held with a date that hadn't happened yet, was my mother's. I sat with that for a long time. The occupied rooms were for the missing, the ones the world was letting go of, but the vacant rooms, the reserved ones, were for people who were still all the way here, still living, still findable, who were nonetheless being kept a room, as if the motel wasn't only a place where the forgotten ended up, as if it was also, quietly, patiently, sending out reservations ahead of time, booking people who hadn't been lost yet. Somebody had reserved 101 for my mother. Somebody had written her name in the expected column in a hand I didn't recognize and couldn't accuse. I want to say I understood everything then. I didn't. I understood it in the wrong order, which is the worst way to understand something, because it means you keep acting on the old version while the new version is already true. Here is the mistake I made, and I'll just tell you and let you judge it. I decided to test whether the departures could be stopped. The binder said, record the departure when the system clears a room. It never said what happened if I didn't. So the next time a room flipped to checked out, room 107, at 3:40 in the morning, the thermostat clicking and the ice dropping right on cue, I did nothing. I didn't clean it at 5. I didn't record it in the ledger. I left it grey and empty in the system, and I waited to see. Nothing happened the first day or the second. The room stayed grey, and I felt, God help me, a little proud, like I'd found the seam in the thing, like I'd proven it was mechanical after all, and I could simply decline the parts I didn't like. On the third day, the clean towels I'd left outside 107 the night of the checkout were still on the rail, but they'd been unfolded and refolded badly, the way a small child folds a towel, or the way someone folds who used to know how and has forgotten, corners not meeting, the whole thing lumped rather than creased. On the fourth day, the little cardboard door hanger was on the outside handle of 107, and I had never touched it, and it was turned to the side that on this motel's ancient stock did not read, "Do not disturb." It read, in that same official font as everything else, one word, please. That night I checked the incoming call log, and there was a call from 1:07:03:07 a.m. Duration 2 minutes and 19 seconds, and the system had, for the first time, transcribed part of it into the notes field, the way it sometimes logged wake-up requests. The transcription read, "I'm ready. You can let me go now. I don't want to wait by the window anymore." I recorded the departure. I cleaned 1:07 at 5. The bed was slept in and cold. Finally, fully cold. The water glass on the nightstand was empty and dry, dust already faint on the inside of it, and there was no note. And somehow the dryness of that glass was the worst thing I'd seen in that place, worse than any warmth, because it meant I had made someone wait. 4 extra days I had left a person, whatever person means, in that building, standing by a window in a state of readiness while I congratulated myself on finding a loophole. The motel hadn't punished me. It had corrected me, patiently, the way you correct someone who means well but doesn't yet understand what their job actually is. After that, I stopped testing, and I did the job exactly. And that's the part I'm most ashamed of, because doing the job exactly is not innocent. By then, I understood, or mostly understood, that the paperwork wasn't recording the departures. The paperwork was finishing them. Let me say it the way I finally said it to myself one night at 4 in the morning, with both hands flat on the desk to keep them still. The people in those rooms were between, missing, not confirmed, gone. Held in the world by everyone out there who refused to give up on them, who kept a bedroom unchanged, who kept a phone number active, who set a place at the table every holiday. Every one of those small acts of hope was a thread, and the person hung suspended on all their threads at once, not here, not gone, waiting. And the larkspur was where the threads came to be cut, but only after they'd already worn thin. When enough people out there finally let go, finally accepted it, finally stopped keeping the room ready at home, the system flipped the room to grey. And then I, the night auditor, with my green ledger and my careful dated initials, made it final. I closed the account. I was the last hand on the last thread. I was the clerk of the forgotten. And business, though the lot stayed empty, was steady. I could have lived with that maybe, and if it had stayed strangers. I told myself the people were leaving anyway, that the world had already let them go, that I was only doing the filing. I got further into that argument than I'd like to admit. I got all the way to comfortable, which is the most dangerous place a person can get. And then in my 11th month, room 116 flipped to green, a new arrival. I'd seen new arrivals before, grey rooms quietly going green with a new name once the old guest had checked out. But this time I did what I always did now. I wrote the name in my notebook, and my pen stopped, because the name in the field was mine. Not close to mine, mine. First name, last name, and the middle name almost nobody knows. The one that exists only on my birth certificate and my old plant ID badge, the one I've never told anyone because I've never liked it. I sat very still. The space heater ticked. I remember thinking, with the cold clarity of a man who has finally run out of road, that there had to be another explanation, and then realizing I'd run out of explanations weeks ago and had just been living in the empty space where the explanations used to be. Room 116 was occupied by me, and I was sitting in the office, alive, breathing, employed, looking at my own name glowing green on the screen. I went to 116. The binder says do not enter occupied rooms, and I'd obeyed that for 11 months, but you cannot read your own name on a checked-in guest and keep your hands off the door. The master key turned. The room was dark and warm and lived in a way the others never quite were, because the others held strangers and this one held me. There were things in it, not exactly my things, but the idea of my things, close enough to make my skin move. A grey jacket over the chair like the one I was wearing, a notebook on the desk like the one in my pocket, closed, and on the nightstand, a photograph, face up, and I picked it up before I could stop myself, and it was a picture of a man I hadn't let myself think about on purpose in 3 years, because thinking about him on purpose cost more than I had, my brother. I have to back up, because this is the part I've never told anyone, and it's the reason I know it's me in that room and not some trick. I have a brother, Daniel, older than me by 2 years. 6 years ago, he hit a bad stretch, the kind that starts with money and ends with him not picking up the phone. And then one day he stopped being anywhere at all. Not dead, just gone. He left his apartment mostly as it was and left his car in the long-term lot at an airport he never flew out of, a detail the police kept returning to. A car parked as if for a trip that never happened, and he walked off into exactly the grey I now understood better than I ever wanted to. And here's the thing I've refused to say out loud, and I'm going to make myself write it. I let go of him first, before anyone. Our mother kept his room exactly the way it was, kept his number in her phone, set his place at Thanksgiving 3 years running, an empty chair and a clean plate, and I sat across from that plate and told her gently, which is the cruelest way, that she needed to accept it, that she was hurting herself, that keeping the room ready was keeping the wound open. I was the one who eventually packed his boxes. I was the one who talked her into letting his phone number go. I remember the exact afternoon, her hand on the kitchen table, the way she looked at the phone in my hand before she nodded. I was the reason his last thread went thin. I did to my own brother, out there in the world, exactly what I did every night at the Larkspur for strangers. I closed the account. The photograph on the nightstand in 116 was one I had taken years ago. I recognized the day. On the back, in my own handwriting, was the date and Daniel's name. And under that, in fresher ink I did not remember using, in what was unmistakably my hand, room 110. Room 110. Mother. Occupied the entire time. Never once checked out. I'd like to tell you I ran to 110 and saved him. That there's a version where I understood in time and refused the paperwork and held the thread and brought my brother back through the door. There isn't. That's not the kind of story this is. And I think some part of you already knew that, because most people are keeping a room ready for someone, or someone is keeping one for them, and part of you has always suspected what the empty motel off the dead road is for. Here's what actually happened. I went to 110. The door was warm to the touch, warmer than the corridor, warm like a chest, and through it, very faintly, I heard a sound I knew before I could name it. A tuneless, absent-minded humming, steady, the kind a person does when their hands are busy and their mind is far away. Daniel used to hum exactly like that at the workbench in our father's garage, fixing bicycle chains, and I had heard that same humming 11 days earlier bleeding through the phone from room 108 under a stranger's breathing, and I had not let myself understand it then. I stood at the door of 110 with the master key in my hand, and I did not use it, because I finally understood the shape of it all at once in the wrong order, too late. Room 110 wasn't labeled Mother because my mother was inside it. It was labeled Mother because it was being held by my mother. It was her thread. 6 years later, she was still, in her own house, keeping Daniel's room ready, keeping the porch light on, and that unbroken thread was the reason he was still checked in, the reason there was still a warm bed and a humming behind that door. My mother's refusal to let go was the only thing keeping my brother from checking out. And I, night after night, had been the man closing other people's accounts for a living, not knowing my own brother's account was open 2 doors down. And my name had just appeared in 116, a new arrival. I don't know what it means to be a checked-in guest at that motel while you're still walking around alive, and I've had a lot of nights since to think about it. The best I can figure is that the room opens for you when the people who love you begin, without meaning to, without even knowing they're doing it, to keep your seat warm out of grief instead of hope. When they start to memorialize you a little while you're still here. When you become, to someone, more absence than presence, even as you sit at their table. Who was grieving me while I was still alive? I asked myself that, standing in the corridor between 110 and 116 at 4 in the morning with the ice machine dropping a load I hadn't scheduled and the pressure changing in my ears. The answer came sideways and undeniable, the way the true ones do. My mother who I'd moved back in with after the plant, who I'd told about my nice quiet night job at a nice quiet motel, who watched me leave grey every evening and come home greyer every morning and go straight to bed and barely speak, who I'd overheard on the phone with her sister a few weeks earlier saying, in a voice I wasn't meant to hear, that she felt like she'd lost both her boys, that one of them still came home but wasn't really there, that she'd started keeping the porch light on for a son who walked through the door every day and still, somehow, hadn't come back. That was the thread. That was what had reserved 101 in her name and opened 116 in mine. She was grieving me alive. And the reservation ledger meant the motel already knew where she was headed and where I was headed, and had the rooms ready. I quit that morning. I left the green ledger open on the last departure I ever recorded, and I did not write another word in it, not room 107, not anything. I hung the master key back on its hook. On my way out, I passed the back office and the door was open, which it never was, and Delia was standing just inside it in the daytime dimness. And she looked at me and she already knew. She said, "You saw your name." It wasn't a question. I said yes. She nodded slowly and said, "Then you still have time." I didn't. By the time I saw mine, I'd already stopped being able to walk out that front door. She looked at the ledger in my hand, and I realized I was holding it. I'd picked it up without deciding to, and she said, "Leave the book. Somebody has to keep it, but it doesn't have to be you, and it can't be you if you want to stay a person." I set the book down on the desk. She said one more thing as I turned to go. She said, "Go home and be there." That's the only thing that closes a reservation, not letting go, being there. Nobody's told them the difference in a long time. I never saw her again, and when I looked the motel up later, there was no back office, no Delia, no Larkspur at all. I drove home as the sun came up, and I did the one thing I understood might matter. I woke my mother. I sat on the edge of her bed like I was 10 years old, and I told her everything that mattered, not the motel. She'd never have believed it, and I didn't need her to, but the rest. I told her I was still here. I told her I was sorry about Daniel. Sorry in the specific, exact way I'd never let myself be. Sorry that I let go of him first. Sorry that I made her let go too. Sorry about the boxes and the phone number and the empty chair I told her to stop setting. I told her to keep the porch light on for him if she wanted, forever. That I'd been wrong. That keeping a room ready isn't what hurts you. That keeping a room ready is a thread. And a thread is the only thing that holds a person in the world. And I would never again ask her to cut one. And I told her, please, to stop keeping one ready for me. Because I was home. Because I was going to be here, actually here, present enough that she'd never again have to grieve a son who was still breathing. She cried. I cried. It was a good morning inside a terrible one. I never went back to the Larkspur. When I looked it up, there was no listing, no reviews, no phone number that connected, and the state route it sat on showed no motel at that mile marker on any map I could find. I drove out there once, in daylight in the fall, to prove to myself it was real. The lot was empty. The pool was drained. The vacancy sign was off at 2 in the afternoon, which is wrong. A small wrong thing, the kind I'd learned to watch. I sat in my car at the edge of the cracked lot for a long time, and I did not go in. 19 rooms, green in some system somewhere, and 3 reserved waiting. There's a new auditor now, I'm sure. There's always a new one. The previous one moves on suddenly. My mother is doing better. She kept Daniel's porch light on, and it seems to have steadied her more than letting go ever did. Grief is strange that way. It wants to be honored, not evicted. And I've been present. I make her coffee. I fix the gutter. I answer when she calls up the stairs right away, every time, because I know exactly what room opens when you stop answering. For a while I thought that was the end of it, that I'd walked out with my name still mine and closed the reservation the only way it can be closed, by being there. But I keep coming back to what Delia said, that she'd stopped being able to walk out the front door, and I keep thinking about how the job doesn't really let you quit, it just changes address. Because 3 nights ago I couldn't sleep, and around 2 in the morning I got up, not by any decision I remember making, and I found myself in the kitchen. I filled the ice tray and set it in the freezer. I went to the hallway and set the thermostat to 71, not 68 where we keep it, 71, the corridor setting. And then I took a clean towel from the linen closet, and I folded it the way I fold, and I carried it down the hall and laid it on the little decorative railing outside the guest room. The room we keep ready for company, for anyone who might come. I don't remember getting up. I remember standing in the dark hallway afterward with a second towel already in my hands, not knowing how it got there, my body finishing a checklist my mind had never agreed to. This morning, one of the towels was gone. Not both, just one. And in its place, folded badly, the way a small child folds, or the way someone folds who used to know how and has forgotten, was a used one, slightly grey, slightly damp in the middle, and laid across it, dark against the pale cloth, was a single hair, and it was not mine, and it was not my mother's, and it was the exact color Daniel's used to be. I checked the guest room. The bed is made, but there's a body-shaped warmth in the mattress if you put your hand flat on it, and it holds the warmth longer than a made bed should. On the nightstand, there's a glass of water now that I did not put there, half full, with a faint oval on the rim. And last night, on the little table by the guest room door, there was a folded piece of paper in handwriting I almost recognized, and I have not been able to make myself throw it away, and it says 4 words. I run the ice at 2 now, every night. I set the thermostat to 71. I leave the towels out. I've stopped asking myself who the room is ready for, and I've stopped asking why, because I've come to understand that asking why is just the polite name for letting go, and I am never letting go of anyone again. My mother thinks I'm finally sleeping better. She hears me up in the night and she smiles in the morning and says it's good to have me back, really back, and she's right. I am back, I am here, I am present, I keep everything ready. The porch light is on, the guest room is made, there's a reservation somewhere in her name and one in mine, and I intend to keep them both open forever, because open is the same as waiting, and waiting is the same as hoping, and hoping is the only thing I have left that looks anything like love. The bed is warm, the ice just dropped. Somewhere down the hall a door is open about an inch, and I'm not going to close it, and I'm not going to look, and I can hear him humming. Thank you for the quiet.